Chapter 45, Chip. He ran it all by Randy first. They were in the parking lot next to maintenance on a golf cart that the buildings and grounds guys always drove around. In the winter, they kept it parked over where the laundry vents were, so the thing wouldn't be so cold every time they needed to use it. It suddenly reminded Chip of Cindy's convertible, out there with the top down and the heat on like that. A brand new memory, and a good one. "Here's the part I don't get," Randy said. "What?" Randy shrugged. "Situation like this," he wondered. "Disciplinary, you know? The chain of command. Your dad would be the one to get into it." "I know," Chip said. They gave it a little more thought. "Neat problem, though, kicking your own kid out of school." Chip agreed, especially when you can't even wake up. They chewed on that point and talked about it some more. After a few minutes, they got off the cart and started throwing a football around that Randy had brought along. They had only thrown a ball between them 1,000,000 times like this. Any ball, any season, whether there was importance to discuss or nothing at all. "You tell your mom yet?" Chip shook his head. There's always someone around. "Well, when's a good time anyway?" Randy wondered, and you couldn't argue that. There would never be a good time to do this. When you could pick your moment, you did. And when you couldn't, you went with the best that was available. And when nothing good was available, sometimes Mother Nature would step in and create the situation for you. A flood, a fire, a crisis of health, and the best you could do was just assume somehow that this was all for your own good. Just like regular mothers, your own good almost never felt like it. They were on the way back to Chip's house when Randy begged off. He saw Janet Pardini coming out of the library, and no way did he have the energy to run into her right then. "Long story," he told Chip, although he didn't have to. Then he darted behind a holly hedge until he could make it past the chapel, and then he'd be free. While Chip, because there was nowhere else to go, went home. "What do you mean you might get suspended?" Mary asked him. "From the school or from the team?" "I think they want to do both, but they don't know how to do it." "I don't think they can do that. Your father's the one who does that." "That's what I mean." Mary thought a minute. It felt like shaking flies in her head. "Well, what did you do?" Chip stopped, thought about what to say. His mind was all twisted up. All he knew was that there was way too much going on and that he wanted the whole world to just stop, even for a second, so everyone would have a chance to catch their breath and then try and make sense out of things. He wanted everything to drop into place and settle there and be quiet. He craved that moment, however brief, of pure completion. Ashes, ashes, all fall down. "Chip?" his mother asked. He looked up at her, trying again to sort it all out and think of what to say. He could have started with Ellie and Vanderlip and Foster Devlin. He could have thrown in Randy and Cindy Lindbergh and Carpenter Shorts and Chenille, or Piccolo and Goodman and hospitals and strokes and doctors and yearbooks in the library and tripping over shoes in a closet, or maybe the nurses in his house and his black and blue father who'd run out of places for them to take blood samples. But all that came to him was a nursery rhyme, where children, linked together, would go in circles until they were blurry, then stop on a heartbeat and drop down in place, queasy and jumbled and bursting with excitement, for no other reason than they had just collectively all fallen down, because that was the way the game was played. Ashes, ashes, Chip thought. But he couldn't tell his mother that. He couldn't tell her any of it, when even one word he knew could bust open the floodgates. Once that happened, he might not be able to start. Once that happened, he might not be able to stop. And if that was the case, he couldn't afford to start. So he buried his head and said nothing.